I will mute a couple of bits. Cool, so we should have everybody muted for now other than Glads. Oh, here comes Tilly, always late. So Calum, Glads and myself should be unmuted. Hello, Tilly. We're going to go straight into it, mate, so I'll mute you off for now. We'll let the other stragglers come in. I'm pretty sure I have now. Yeah, I've hit record, so we're all good. So hello and welcome to Crazy Strength Sunday session. I think this is the 6th one I have run now. They seem to be growing arms and legs, which is nice. I should probably introduce myself to those that are new and haven't been here before. My name's Craig Spicer. I full-time work for the Army as a civilian physical training instructor. I also am head coach for Army weightlifting, Army powerlifting, and been involved in both sports for a number of years now. Do a little bit of work for LECO as well on the side, delivering courses and a few bits like that. Also run my own team, Crazy Strength. I started these kind of little Zoom chats up on a Wednesday and Sunday night initially when we had the lockdown side of things. Found that they were really good for kind of keeping people kind of knitted and close together, really nice socially. Opened up the Sunday ones, which I tended to put a little bit of an educational spin on the Sunday efforts. Opened them up and they seem to be fairly popular. I have recorded them now as well and managed to get my IT skills up to the extent that I can actually get them onto a YouTube channel. So I this week got the Crazy Strength YouTube channel up. So we've put them all on there. So the previous 5 ones, the first 2 are a little bit ropey. I think we did motivation and mobility for the first couple, but they've got a little bit slicker from there on in, which is good. I've also managed to, one of our coaches, Lucy Alvey, she has done 3 Pilates sessions as well. They are obviously free of charge. They're on the YouTube channel. So if you're bored and want to get your core nice and strong, you can jump on there as well and jump on them. So I think that is about, I've got my nice little whiteboard prepped up as well, just so I know roughly what I'm doing. So I've covered why we're doing this and all that sort of thing. So the aim of today is to have more of a reflective discussion. I've got a PowerPoint that we can kind of go through that's going to guide the discussion. But I want to talk about what weight categories are, why choose certain weight categories, the thought process that goes behind or should go into it, certainly for powerlifting and weightlifting. I know we've got a couple of other sports which I'll kind of pull into as well as we go through. And then just as important to that, the actual taper side of it as well. Chris kindly got in touch in the week and suggested getting in touch with Calum Stronach, who I will let introduce himself in just a second. I was lucky enough that I went to the British Weightlifting Educators Conference for the 2nd year this year. I was in the educator side, and I know Calum produced a nutrition brief for the development side of bringing the youth through. Thankfully, I was having to hold back and bring Christian home as well. So I got to sit in that, and it was really, really interesting. Very, very intelligent guy when it comes to the nutrition side, but delivers on a really nice level so that it's easy to understand as well. So without further ado, Calum, if you would like to give a quick explanation of who you are, what you've done and what you know.
Yeah, awesome. So I kind of come from 2-point strand. So I actually spent many years working with Welsh weightlifting, but more kind of on the coaching side and regional development side. I've trained before that as a kind of nutritionist, and I'm a registered nutritionist. And then today I have my own kind of private practice in central London, where I kind of work more towards with kind of more specialist female conditions in and around kind of the female health side, anything ranging from kind of PCOS to endometriosis, that kind of spectrum. And then I have worked with 3 national governing bodies on the kind of elite sport performance spectrum. So British weightlifting being one of them, British athletics and British fencing currently. Previously, I've worked with Tottenham Hotspur, Cardiff City Football Club as well. And yeah, it's just the case of one of the things, particularly about the discussion today, is that there's so many different variables that kind of impact nutrition, body weight, where we sit naturally, and context is massively applicable to that. So hopefully it'll kind of open up a real nice discussion today.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'll say thank you to Glads today as well, because Glads is kindly going to monitor the chat as well. So you see towards the bottom, you've got the chat box. If anyone's got any questions and they don't feel like they can interject, type the question in there, and Glads will keep an eye on that, and we'll chuck out the questions as they come through if he feels it necessary. So much appreciated. I know we've got loads of coaches, we've got loads of athletes of all different levels as well. If at any point you want to jump in with a question, just unmute your mic, jump in with a question. Don't feel like you're being rude. If you're thinking it, someone else probably is. And also, come and go policy is nice and simple as well. If you need to go, some of these have lasted nearly 2 hours. So if you need to go, or you want to go and come back, you need the toilet, don't just cross your legs. Go, come back, feel free to move about as you need be. So what we're going to cover today, I have a nice little presentation that hopefully I can share with you. Cool, I'm hoping, in fact, Glads, if you give me a thumbs up, you should be able to see the presentation on your screen, yes.
Yeah, I've got that.
So, we have a few bits and bobs. There's a few bits we'll go through. The prior questions that we've got coming through, which are just bits and bobs that when I got people to register as we came through, these are the kind of main things. There's only 9 of them there. So what I don't want to do is dwell on them now. I've got them again at the end so we can kind of reiterate at the end so we can just summarize and go, right, have we answered that one? Have we answered that one? So that's kind of the main things you go out. And as Calum said, there's so many different things to select in a weight category and how to taper and the options around that. I'm really excited actually to have Calum here because whilst my knowledge of some of the nutrition side of things and how to taper safely and making the right decisions to look after an athlete into a taper, I've probably not got the knowledge to kind of support that with all the, maybe not the geeky science stuff, but the rationale nutritionally behind the reasons why and all that sort of stuff. So it'd be really good for me to learn that side of things too. So thoughts of a barbell geek, I'm going to leave you with a couple of nice little phrases to start with that we will kind of look towards at the end. I'll take you through those in a minute. The weight category side, we're going to look at the simple stuff. So what the categories are, and then the choices that you have in why you would select a weight category. We'll look at tapering, look at the basic options, which is probably where I will look to lean on Calum a little bit more. Tapering tips, just things that I've come across either as an athlete in my background. For those that don't know, I did about 4 or 5 years as a drug-free powerlifter to lots of different competitions from regional to international competitions, mainly at the massive category at 56 kilos, which has its own stories as well. Most people that know me know I'm not a big lad. Probably shouldn't have always been a 56 kilo lifter. And then the tapering, the good, the bad and the ugly, my experiences and an opportunity for everyone to share their experiences in the discussion side of things. So let's give you this one. These two here are kind of ones that I thought were 2 that I'd like to kind of dwell on to start with. So you have patience is simply the ability to wait. It's not simply the ability to wait. It's about how we behave while we're waiting. That's Joyce Meyer. Joyce Meyer, she's not one that crops up very often. She is a kind of a Christian speaker within America. She has nothing to do with weightlifting or anything at all. It's a quote that I think is quite pertinent tonight. And then Aristotle always comes out with a nice good quote. Patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. We will refer back to that and you will understand why I've brought them out towards the end. So for those that are here to start with, and I will dip into the kind of special key speakers that I've got as well, because I've got a couple of guys and girls from a couple of the other sports that are here. But for weightlifting on the left-hand side, it's fairly simple. For weightlifting, we have one national governing body. You will align yourself with these weight categories, whether you like it or not, because they are the weight categories we now have. They changed 18 months or so ago, I think, maybe a little longer than that. So depending on your aspirations, it will depend on what category you look to line yourself in. For me, I'm probably not going to be going to the Olympics at my ripe young age. So I don't need to worry about the ones down the right-hand side. I can just keep an eye on the left-hand side ones. So we also have there the British drug-free powerlifting classes as well. Men ranging from the 52 cat all the way to 145 plus, and then the females from the 44 cat up to the 90 plus. Over that way, we also have the British powerlifting. It's interesting that I want to bring out that those are the 2 drug-free predominant federations that we know of within nationally, so the UK. there are similarities in the categories. There's a few less categories, I think, with British powerlifting, but always interesting to see the difference. It's also interesting to note that, and I know Rich also asked the question of how to choose which federation to lift with, and we'll come on to that. We'll try and answer that as we go through a little bit better. The two predominant drug-free, and I am a drug-free coach, are British powerlifting and British rugby powerlifting. You've got somewhere in the region of 12 other different powerlifting federations within the UK. It's a bone of contention for me. It means that we have probably thousands of British champions a year with powerlifting. It's easy to kind of get a little bit waylaid with that side of things, but we won't go into that for now. But we do also have other categories or other sports that use weight categories to try and have a level playing field. Obviously, CrossFit is probably a good example of one that doesn't have that level playing field. It is the fittest. Strongman, you have all the martial arts as well. So boxing, judo, wrestling, kickboxing, mixed martial arts, taekwondo, and then you have bobsleigh, which I wasn't aware of until Joe spoke to me a couple of weeks ago. And then rowing's a fairly obvious one as well. So what I will do at this time is I will maybe call forward a couple of the key speakers. Joe, if you want to start, you're more than welcome to. I know Joe's background is from bobsleigh. I'll just let her give you a little bit of an introduction as to how she kind of got into the sport and the effect that the weight category side of things maybe had on her. Joe.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Perfect.
So I got into bobsleigh through the army. Started off sort of like give it a go for a week, and then ended up last summer going for GB selection and was selected to represent GB. Last season just gone, and I raced 5 times for GB across the world. Within bobsleigh, it's not necessarily the athlete that's weighted. It's the bobsleigh, the 2 athletes in the 2-man or 4-man in the bobsleigh. And the categories are 325 kilos for a bobsleigh and 2 women in it with a helmet and spikes on. And for 2 men, it's 390. If you look at the athletes, the bobsleighs weigh 170 kilos. So an average athlete male is 110 kilos and an average female is 77.5. For me personally, I started the sport probably at around 95 kilos. I was way too heavy. So I ended up dropping down to about 82 within the army stuff. And when I was selected for GB, monobob's a new sport that's coming in and should be in the Olympics in 2022. The athlete is weighed, and it's 85 kilos is a limit to the athlete with a helmet and spikes on. That's about 2 kilos in them 2 items. So for me, I have to maintain 83 as a maximum now. And I've actually dropped down to 77, which means that I can add weight to my sled. That's sort of a bit of an insight into bobsleigh weights.
Does that give you a competitive advantage to add weight to the sled?
Yeah, so if you, in monobob, you can only add 5 kilo weights. In a normal bob, you can add anything you want as long as it's a sort of regulated weight bar. But for me now, I can add 5 kilos of dead weight to the back of my sled and push that weight rather than carrying it in my body.
Right, okay, that makes sense. And the other question that you messaged earlier about, when do you weigh in? Because I think this was the interesting thing for Bob.
So on a bobsleigh race, there's 2 loughs, so 2 races down the track. And we weigh in between the 2 loughs. So you do your first one, you get to the bottom, the scale's at the bottom of the track, and you weigh in at that point then. So if you're going to, I don't know, water load and then not and dehydrate beforehand, you've got to compete your first louth dehydrated or starving. Some people do it, but I have experience, I've done it, and it is horrendous. So I don't recommend it, but people do it all the time to cut weight.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting. We'll pull Calum in on that one maybe towards the end. But I think it's interesting for me that almost brings a third dynamic, because obviously the sports that I'm maybe focused in a little bit more, obviously boxing, you have normally a 24-hour weigh-in. But then obviously with powerlifting, obviously depending on what you're doing, BDFPA, they're supposed to have a 2-hour weigh-in, but they normally weigh everyone in the morning, then crack on from there. British powerlifting and British weightlifting both have a structured 2-hour window, so that gives you a different dynamic to it. And then yours obviously brings an even more of a dynamic to it, which is interesting. Let's see. I don't know whether Jess is there. She wasn't at the start. Jess, are you there? No, she's not. In which case, Sean, you are next up if you want to give your background and experience, please.
Oh, am I on?
You are on, I can hear you.
Hello everyone. So I've competed in weight class sports from a very early age. Firstly in judo, kickboxing, boxing, and then moving on to powerlifting and strongman. And this resulted in probably a 23-year battle with eating disorders, probably from lack of knowledge and succumbing somewhat to social pressures. So I've done some pretty horrendous things to make weight for comps. Craig has been witness to some of them. I've been involved, not kind of technically involved, but guilty by association, unfortunately.
Associated with stuff he doesn't know is going on.
Craig was my coach, and I do feel a little bit sorry for him because I put him in some awkward situations with the way I was kind of making weight for comps. I did reasonably well at masters level within the BDFA and World Association, but I've kind of took the last 12, 18 months off, and I'm under treatment now with the NHS, and that's pretty much where I'm at, unless Craig wants to add anything.
No, absolutely. I think the main thing I wanted to bring out, and I'm proud actually, as a friend and as an athlete, that you're open enough to be able to talk about those sort of things fairly openly now. I know that a few years ago it probably wouldn't have been quite so easy for you, but it's a prime example of dealing with that side of things, and I'm sure it's something that Calum probably deals with probably more often than I do these days. But dealing with the issues that are associated with eating habits and dieting in and around weight categorized sports and things like that. I think, who else did I make a note of? Tilly, do you want to have a chat and introduce you and your background?
Am I on?
Hello.
Hello. So I came from powerlifting. I was a bit of an immature, young, naive 18 to 20-year-old, no experience whatsoever, just wanting to try it out. Naturally would sit at around 78, 79 kilos. Started working with Craig literally a year ago when I got into weightlifting, and the issues again that I put him through, the discussions we've had regarding performance and weight categories, it really opened my eyes to what I was doing to my body and myself. I've discussed and had conversations along with Sean and Craig together, because I too suffered eating disorders because of the weight categories and the stress I was putting myself under. I just completely refused to eat. So the stress of a competition, knowing that the categories would cut off around, I think powerlifting was 80 kilos and weightlifting is 81. So if I was sat at 79.9, I was way too close to that category to be able to focus. So I'd stop eating for days before. Craig then would have to deal with me and try and fuel me for my performance when I just didn't want to listen and didn't want to take that in, even though I knew that I wasn't going to perform my best without the fuel. It's lessons learned, and it's all experience. And now this year, from speaking to Sean and Craig, I have learned to tell them when I'm in a dip, when I'm not feeling great, and we handle it, we process, we move forward, and we lift bigger, better things. I think that's pretty much where we're at.
Perfect, thank you. I think we've just seen Jess has dropped in. Hey Jess, I've just unmuted you, mate. How are you? All right?
Oh, how did you unmute me?
Oh, it's magic.
That's smart. Hello.
If you we've just done only the brief intros and stuff, the normal stuff that you had last week. If you just give us a brief intro on your background. I know yours is, as well as weightlifting, is the judo side of things as well. On your experiences with kind of the weight categorized thing and prepping for a weight cut and things like that.
Oh, where do I start? Well, I've been effectively weight controlled my whole life. Because although gymnastics is not like categories, I still have to get weighed every week, and they constantly like keep an eye on like your figure, and if you're too heavy compared to your partner, like it's complete and utter crap, to be fair. But with the judo, it just, when I was younger, like I started when I was quite late. So I started judo when I was 16 for my GCSEs, and then obviously like I hadn't fully grown because I still like had the gymnast figure where my body wasn't like fully developed yet. And then as I like kind of, I guess, went through puberty late, I'd already been put into the 52 category. So actually the judo categories, as far as the women's go, are pretty much the same for the powerlifting.
Okay.
Give or take, like 47 is 48, 52, 57, 63, under 70, and then it kind of gets, I'm not sure what happens after that. I just can't remember. But yeah.
We never get to those.
And I basically got put into like, well, it never concerned me because I was always on the bottom end of the spectrum. But basically I got put into a 52 category, and I was expected to kind of like stay there through my, I guess, time like competing. And the problem is that I was still growing, and I lost a lot of weight when I quit gymnastics, and then I instantly put it like back on, because you just kind of lose it around your legs, and then you put it back on around your back, because that's where, you know, judo builds muscle. And unfortunately I had like a coach that she hadn't quite realized that I was growing out of my weight category, and she basically keeps encouraging me. She's like, you're too small for 57, because like I'm tiny. And generally, like with judo, they're not all really tiny like me. That quite a lot of them are like quite tall and slender. So it was just she just kept kind of pushing me down and was like, yeah, you're never going to be a 57. You're not big enough. You're not strong enough.
She seems like the ideal kind of model of what a 57 should look like.
What is there a good ideal model?
No, coach was probably seeing or suggesting that she saw what an ideal 57 was and didn't think that was you.
Well, I think partly that, and also partly there was another girl from my club that actually made it to the Olympics, and she was a 57 player. So I think partly she was thinking long term, and she didn't want too many players in the same category.
Right.
And I don't think she quite realised how bad it was with me, because I was at uni at the same time when it got really bad. And I didn't have my parents to kind of like speak to or like keep monitoring me, and I was effectively living on my own with a bunch of strangers. It just went completely out of control, and I had binge eating disorder, and my coach was she didn't quite understand, because my club's up in London, but I was down in Brighton at the time, and I was visiting her once a week. And I think partly the problem is like I felt like I owed it to her to like stay in the right weight category, because the way it's different with weightlifting. With judo, you basically build up ranking as the more comps you do. So it's not like I go into the 59 category for weightlifting and I lift, I don't know, enough to get me into like the top 5 in the country.
Yeah.
The way it works with judo is each comp you do, you get ranking points, and like the bigger competitions like the British Championships, you get like 100 points if you medalled, and like 50 if you got like bronze, and then so on and so forth. And then the small events, you get like 50 points if you medalled, and if you didn't place at all, you just wouldn't get any. So the people that ended up becoming higher up on the ranking were people that did like more comps, and the more comps you do, obviously the more time you're cutting weight. It's like a vicious cycle. You end up, the more comps you think you do, the higher you get up, and then you don't want to go into the new weight class because you have to start again. But
yeah,
it's just
hard, really hard.
It's
certainly so you were 16.
I was like, it was between 16 and 21. 20.
Even at those ages,
yeah.
that's a lot of responsibility as well, especially with college and uni and all that sort of stuff going on as well.
But the problem is, like, it's the same with, like, I've seen it in weightlifting as well. Once someone's weighed in, they'll just chuck a load of food down them. But there was like a really bad, I guess, like thing. People would go to international competitions, they'd be cutting on the plane, they'd be like dehydrated, dying. And I'm talking they're like 16, 17. And then they'd have all this, like, I guess, like cheap food that they would have in a bag. And as soon as they'd weighed in, they'd glug like 2 liters of water and eat as much crap as they could.
Yeah, we'll come to that. That's already on the list.
But yeah, so
Cool, perfect. Thank you. At any point, mate, if you've got anything to add, obviously just chuck yourself back in. Shout over me if you need to. I'm more than happy for that. Thank you very much, mate. Cool. So, perfect. So we've already kind of looked at what the categories are, and I want to now kind of go through all the bits and bobs. I'll keep looking at my left-hand side because I've made a couple of notes. But what I want to look at is the things you probably need to take into account. Calum, if you want to jump in at any point, jump in and add. Don't feel like you're treading on my toes. That includes any of the other coaches as well. So the first kind of things that I've got down is, and this is obviously specific more to powerlifting or weightlifting than anything else, is, and this comes back to things like, what is the best category for me? So what is the purpose of the sport and what is optimal? So the purpose of the sport in both weightlifting and powerlifting is fairly simple. It's to take as much weight as you can off the floor, other than bench and squat, but as much weight as you can through that range of movement as possible. That's it. Lift as much weight as you can. So, and this is, I know, one of the things kind of Jess was going to, and I will look at I was a 56 kilo lifter for too long. I was probably a competitive 56 kilo lifter for about 2 years. Jess is looking at me to say, well, you're 56 kilos. And then, don't laugh. But I got to a stage there when actually I was defeating the purpose of the sport and the long-term goals, because I was just staying in that category because I was good at getting into that category, and I got really good at getting into a weight category. But that didn't necessarily, shut up, Sean. That didn't necessarily mean that I was optimal at that time as well. I think the best explanation for that is something along the lines of, I mean, everyone's heard the term mass moves mass. And we look at the Chinese with the weightlifting side of things, they are huge. They fill as much functional tissue, contractile muscle as they can to impart mass, to move mass. And that is your ideal category. It's not as simple as that. It's not as easy as that. But on the start of it, that is kind of what we start to look at. So you then need to look at things like, what is your competition-specific training age and your experience? So if you've just started, it's probably a little bit different for the likes of Tilly and Jess and a couple of others who have done a number of different sports across their lifetime. They have experience with weight categories. They know they'll get to, once you've done a couple of years and you've maybe done 3 or 4 weigh-ins a year, you kind of know what to expect. You know what you're looking at. It's not different. But if you're cutting into your weight category in your first couple of competitions, your anxiety level is so high that you are pinning so much on making weight and getting into that weight category that by the time you get to the platform, you're almost not prepared to do what you need to do because you're a nervous wreck, even if you have weighed in. There's so much that goes on a comp day that I know experienced lifters kind of take it for granted, and they just take it in the motions. But unless you have experience in that side of things, then it's going to be a shock to the system. So that's one of the things to take into account. Once you've gone through and gotten that experience, then you can take a little bit more care to it. But I normally suggest for the first 2 to 3 competitions for a new lifter, don't even think about tapering. Don't even think about the weight cap. Tip up, rock up, get some experience, and just feel what it's like to be in front of an official. Because when you're on that platform, and any weightlifter that's had a few competitions under their belt, when you're on that platform and there's 3 officials looking at you, it's deadly silence, and there's a room of people behind you. It's really daunting. You want to be as prepared as you can to actually just go through that and just enjoy the day and take everything in. What do you weigh now? And I'll bring that next one up as well. What do you weigh now, and what is your composition? How much functional tissue, how much functional contractile mass do you have? And that's not me trying to be rude. If you have tissue that is adipose tissue and you are carrying tissue that isn't functional and doesn't create force, it is not going to benefit you in your sport. The purpose of your sport is to utilize your body tissue to move as much mass as possible. So the hard side of that is how you deal with that side of things. And we'll maybe it will come through as we go, but you look at the training experience and training age. If you've got someone who is carrying an extra 3 or 4 kilos and they're in their first couple of years and they're nowhere near qualifying for any form of competition that they would like to in the future, what's the point in them dropping that 3 or 4 kilos and running the risk of developing that association with the food and the weight categories and everything else? It defeats the object of what they're actually looking to try and do. So it's worthwhile looking at what you weigh and what your composition is, but you also need to take into account everything else as well. When is the weigh-in, and in respect of your lifting? Jess, I'm gonna unmute you a sec. When's your judo? When's the weigh-in?
Right. So this is going to shock you all. It varies. So one for the big international comps, they weigh in the night before, and then they do something called a test weigh the next day. So basically, they pick someone at random in each weight class, and they weigh them again. And as long as you're in 2.5% of your weight category, so say if I weighed in at 52 dead on, which is normally the case, and then the next day, obviously, I've eaten and stuff, I could weigh in at a heaviest of 54.5 or 54.2 or something like that. Yeah. And I'd still be okay because effectively I'm within that range. And the reason for that is because they had a couple of instances at the Olympics where this guy literally dropped 10 kilos. You know how they do in boxing and they go like crazy. And they dropped 10 kilos and this guy had literally put that 10 kilos back on overnight, effectively. I don't even understand. Like the biggest weight fluctuation I've ever had is like 2.5 to 3 kilos overnight. But that was like when I was cutting about 3 kilos and I was pretty lean. So that was mainly water weight.
That's quite a lot for your body size as well, 2.5 kilos overnight.
Yeah, at 52, it was like actually unreal. But the thing is on top of that, if you're going to like a local comp, I've had it where I've actually cut weight, and then what happened is you have to weigh in, and some comps you weigh in your underwear, and some comps you have to weigh in your gi, and your trousers and your t-shirt are heavy. It's about, you get 0.5 allowance, but gi trousers weigh about 1 kilo, so you have to effectively overcut. And I went to a comp once and they basically didn't specify properly how I was weighing in, so I basically then had to cut an extra bit of weight, and I weighed in half an hour before I was on the mat.
Wow.
And I basically stumbled my way through my first fight, and I don't know how I won. It was because they're 4-minute bouts, and it's not like 4 minutes like if you stop, it's 4 minutes, and then every time you stop it doesn't count. So
it's only active.
And for me it was super bad because I got Raynaud, so if I'm like moving around too much, after about 2 minutes I can't feel my feet or my hands.
Wow.
So I had to try and get them quickly, but when you're that tired and you've cut that much weight and then you've chucked a load of food in, like your body is just not ready.
It just doesn't function at all. Yeah.
But generally, they tend to they try and keep it an hour before at least, so you've got a bit of time. But it really depends.
Yeah, it's hard.
They keep changing the rules. So I don't know.
Crazy. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. No problem.
Cool. So that gives us a nice example of, and actually, I did, in fact, my first Worlds was in Moldova. My second powerlifting Worlds was in Italy. And I don't know whether Dave's here, but I met Dave Watts there actually. But I weighed in fact, I went for 2 8-mile walks 2 days before and actually weighed in at 54.5, which was my best weigh-in, but it was, stop making that face, Jess. 54.5 in the 56 cat, which was too much of a weigh-in. And I lifted okay. I was probably able to be in that. I won't give you the boring story, but the short story of that is in 2011, had cancer, had 6 months of chemo, went down to 7.5 stone, and that was me coming back out of that side of things, which probably explains why I was so light at that time. We won't dwell on that. So I weighed in at 7:30 in the morning, and they weighed everyone in at that time. And then I think Dave and I started lifting at about 5 o'clock in the evening, and we finished deadlifting at about 11 o'clock at night. So I finished lifting maybe 12 hours after I had actually weighed in at 54.5. It was just phenomenal. So even with international competition, although that is an amateur organization, even with international competition, there are always things to be prepared for weigh-ins and that side of things. So keeping as much control as you can is probably worth knowing. We'll do some more of about when the weigh-in is and in respect of when you actually lift as well as we go through how important the competition is. I think I've already kind of covered that. If you're in your first couple of years and you're relatively inexperienced and you don't know what happens on a comp day, just go and enjoy the comp day. However, there are some examples, and in fact, I'll bring up an example now of Sunita, who I don't think is here, but Sunita is a very good powerlifter. She was a 58.5 last year for me. Sean's probably going to giggle because obviously it's Sean's athlete, and I stole her. But I worked with Sunita for about a year leading up to that. We had a really good year last year in the World Drug Free with Sunita and Dave both winning the male and female overall. I think her numbers were something along the lines of at 58.5. She hit I think it was a 160-ish back squat, 87.5 pause bench, and a 172.5 deadlift, which was decent. But she always got a bit nervous around weigh-ins and that sort of things. She'd probably only done 6 or 7 competitions, so she was still relatively new and inexperienced to things like weight cuts and managing that. But I went over to Germany with them and kind of managed her weight cut a little bit better. Now, she also did her first British powerlifting competition with the British Classic earlier in the year, whereas she changed her job. She moved over to Belfast just before Christmas. She then did a 2-week new job interview and learning her new job for 2 weeks in, where was she? She was in New York. Came back about 10 days before the British Classic. And I think she was about 8 kilos over her category, which was the 57.5. Now, it's not too bad on the basis that, and we look at the, what do you weigh now and what is your composition? I knew she could easily make a 58.5 kilo cat. She hadn't been training because of her issues with her job. So I knew that she was able to drop. So that was a simple case of managing her macros, making sure she wasn't being stupid. So she was sensible. She went for lots of kind of low intensity, steady state type stuff.
In 8 days, she lost 8 kilos.
No, it was about 3 weeks.
Oh, okay.
About 3 weeks.
Fine. Yeah.
I was aware of it beforehand, but she actually got back from New York with 10 days out. So it was about 3 weeks, which again is a complete no-go, and I would not advise to anyone. I think I'll put it on my Instagram as well. Yeah, it's a situation that I would not want her to be in again. And if she was, she's going to the comp on her own. So
it's also a bit crabby as well.
Say that again?
Hanger is a real thing.
Yeah. And
I feel sorry for anyone around.
I don't want to be sexist, but young ladies tend to be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to hanger. Until you start waving at me.
Can't tell you I have experience in that.
Yeah, it's not so good. I mean, I'm grumpy, but yeah, it's not good. But yeah, long story cut short. I think he is here somewhere. I'm sure he'll jump up a bit. I think he's very tired, bless him. But long story cut short, we managed her macros safely. We did water cut her as well, and she had never water cut before. I structured that water cut to the T, literally messaging her every hour, making sure she was the right way up. I travelled up there. I made sure she was safe. She was there with her family and all that sort of stuff. And for the cut that it was, she lifted okay. Lost lots of power when it came to the deadlift towards the end of the day. She actually did better than I would anticipate her doing with the cut that she had. Would I do it again? No. Would I advise it? Hell no. And it was only because it was a competition she had qualified for already that I kind of went through it. And to the extent that if she'd have gone up and she'd have not weighed in first thing that morning, that would have been a no-go for me. That would have been you're not losing any more weight. That's it. You're out. You're going home. So yeah, that was that one. What else have we got? what are you achieving from manipulating the weight? It probably goes along with the bits that are above. What are you looking to achieve from manipulating that weight? Are you going to gain anything from manipulating that weight, or is it just a short-term, I'm going to jump into the weight category below me because I can take a medal at a regional competition, which, yeah, it's quite nice when you're in your first 6 to 12 months, but you will very quickly learn that you can only have so much space at home for trophies that you've won because you're the only one in the cat, and it doesn't really work like that. That's literally how I became a world champion. What else we got? What are the long-term effects of from your decision making? These are the really interesting ones. I know Jess kind of came on at the end. We had both Sean and Tilly jump on as well, and their stories are very kind of similar to yours as well, Jess. It's something that I actually have a young lady, I work with her during the day. She works with me at the army. She's a civilian. She does a lot of my nutrition requirements. I kind of selected her because I know her. I know that she's morally very sound. I can communicate well with her. I know that she won't make drastic decisions, and she's very open and honest. And if she thinks you're being stupid, she'll probably tell you. I don't deal with the nutrition side of things myself because I find it hard dealing with, and I like the psychological side of supporting athletes and making sure athletes are, in my opinion, if you've not looked after an athlete and they're not okay in the bigger picture off the platform, they're probably not going to perform their best on the platform. So it's a real passion of mine to make sure all of that side of things right. And nutrition is a massive part of that. And if you're not aware of the decisions you're making and how that will affect you in the future, and it will go back to the bits that I put out at the top, then it's kind of key in making those decisions, not just for, and this is another big thing that I kind of bang on about, most of these things are very short periods of life, and they will be setting you up, and competing is great. I love competing. I love working with athletes, but for most of those athletes, it's 10, 15, maybe 20% of their life. Whatever you as a coach, whatever tools you give them to deal with these things, they're going to take that into their life after that as well. So those coping mechanisms that they either develop that are bad or develop that are good are going to be taking them into their life as well. So it's, without sounding too sentimental, it's a very key thing. Cool. So Calum, I think this is probably where you all come in. So what I think I will do is I will go through each of the options. I'll do option one. I'll give my very broad brush kind of, this is what I recommend, this is how I would do it. And then I'm going to let you just drop knowledge bombs and stuff. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no problem.
Sounds cool. So number one, and if you disagree with any of these, Calum, please just disagree with me and give all your understandings and your explanations, please. As much a learning day for me. So option one is my kind of go-to, my favorite recommendation. It's the easiest one for me because we're looking at performance. And as soon as you start removing macro and micronutrients, so carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and then all the micronutrients. So we've got salt manipulation there as well, but your bog standard salts, your vitamins, your minerals, and all that side of things. I'm not going to go too deep into it because whilst I know some stuff, I don't know too much stuff. Once we start losing that, we then start losing kind of key attributes of performance. So in an ideal world, we want to be as fueled as best as possible in order to perform. So in my mind, why would you want to be taking away any nutrition that you don't need so that you can perform optimally on the platform? Water manipulation it's fairly easy to do. Psychologically, it's quite hard. It's nowhere near as hard as dealing with a food disorder for the rest of your life. So I would suggest that, and the question that came out quite a lot was, should I be at the bottom of a weight category or at the top of a weight category? I would prefer someone to be just over the top of their weight category, lean as shitty death, and functional as possible, as full with food as you can, and ready to go, and no more than between probably 5 to 7% over that category, so that they're able to potentially water load, fluctuate their water in a way that they can dehydrate and then rehydrate after a weigh-in. It works very well for a 2-hour weigh-in. It doesn't work very well for an almost immediate weigh-in and performance. So bobsleigh, I would definitely not advise it in my experience. It works really well for a 24-hour weigh-in because you can hydrate yourself so much better. Simply, and I think powerlifting to win or something like that, there's a really good one on there. I'll see if I can kind of put that out. Unless Calum has anything he can push out or put out for us. But in theory, you would look at, say, for example, you were going to, and actually what I'll do is I'll leave the salt manipulation side of things to you, Calum, because it's probably better that you explain that. The basic layman's terms are, you're going to compete on the Saturday. The first thing you'll look to do is on the Monday or the Tuesday, you'll start by drinking 5-ish litres of water. Just not 5 litres first thing in the morning, it's 5 litres of water, roughly, and it will depend on the size of the human, depending on how much you need. I will obviously need way more than everybody else because I am massive. 5 litres on the Tuesday, 6 litres on the Wednesday, 7 litres on the Thursday, and then on the Friday, you're then looking to continue to drink, but you stop 24 hours before you are due to weigh in. You can continue to sip water. All it really does is it trains the body, and I'll let Calum do the sciencey stuff in a minute. It trains your body to force to release the fluid that you have in your body. You will continue to urinate and let out all of it. Hot baths work quite well, saunas work quite well, but only as long as they are managed really well, and health is the most important side for that. Why is it hard psychologically? The hardest thing psychologically I find with a water cut, and I've done it a couple of times myself, is that when you first start water loading, say for example, I'm lifting in the 61 cap, I'm sitting at 62 kilos. Albeit I probably wouldn't cut from there anyway, but I'm weighing at 62 kilos. I start drinking litres and litres of water. I'm suddenly 63 or 64 kilos, which is the complete opposite of what you want to be doing with a water load. It is trusting that ultimately you are going to be relinquishing yourself of more fluid than you are putting in. And it's a really hard cycle. But apart from that, that is probably the way I'll go for it. Calum, I can see you chomping at the bit. I will let you go for it, unless Jess is unmuted. Jess, you got anything to add?
Oh, yeah, I was just waiting for you to say. Basically, I'd say if you're going to do water manipulation, also make sure you're not eating like watery foods along with it. So like if you're like water loading and then dehydrating and then you have a fat salad, you kind of
defeating the object.
I mean, what's the point? Yeah.
Yeah,
just to take into note.
I'll let Calum jump on that one. All yours, Calum.
Well, one of the things, I mean, there's a kind of an ideal way in my mind that can kind of, particularly I know that option 2 is going to be talking largely around kind of the use of macronutrients and micronutrients and kind of a potential manipulation of those.
Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, let's go through that, and then we can talk through a kind of a combination of both. And
I'll let you do that, dude.
So what you can do, so if we look at the kind of the short-term macronutrient restriction, so first and foremost, we can look at calories as a whole. When we're looking at kind of macro tracking as a whole, macro tracking is basically glorified calorie counting. Let's just kind of put that out there for the beginning part. So we know that 1 gram of carbohydrate is 4 calories, 1 gram of fat is 9 calories, and 1 gram of protein is 4 calories as well. And so within that, we also can have an idea that we know that 1 pound of body fat is equal to about 3,500 calories. So 1 pound of body fat is equal to about 3,500 calories, which now the difficult thing is that we are emotionally driven beings. We are, so to get 100% compliance is difficult. And then, or perfect compliance is difficult. And then as well as that, we also have, without the collection of large amounts of data, the predictors, we're basically looking at means of predicting someone's daily energy expenditure. So we know what their maintenance level of calories is, and we can, but it's going to be a prediction. And we can use things like, we can monitor certain metrics over time, which will make that more accurate. But if we're not given that, so say if I'm given an athlete 6 weeks out, 3 weeks out from a competition, I haven't got that time to kind of collect that data initially. And so we can, but with that kind of 3,500, we can use that as a kind of a guide to drop body fat in a more sustainable way. And there are kind of that I would definitely think about kind of having some sort of periodization to that through even a 12-week competition cycle. But if we're talking in the short term, what we also know is that obviously carbohydrates are stored as glycogen within the liver and the muscle. Now, the liver, we will store about 100 grams of glycogen in the liver. We will store the average person is around 400 grams in their muscle. So 400 grams of glycogen in their muscle, and that can go up to about 800 grams within elite, like super elite athletes. And so there you have the potential of losing, if we kind of manipulate our carbohydrate intake and take it particularly below the region of 50 grams, start looking at maybe a more ketogenic approach, then there's half a kilo that can come with that. Now, as well as that, for every 1 gram of glycogen that is stored, around 3 grams of water binds onto each gram of glycogen. So by decreasing your carbohydrate intake, there you have room for up to 2 kilos worth of weight, which is literally just body stores. That's literally just body stores in the run up to competition. Now, there's going to be some element of preference within that. Some people have a high component of carbohydrate within their diet just naturally. Some people might have more safe preferences towards fat. So that's going to kind of naturally, like just preference of food choices is going to dictate that. But it's something that, particularly in comparison to water manipulation, now water manipulation can elicit a kind of, it's a really straightforward protocol. It is something that can potentially elicit in a great, because of manipulation of not only just stores within the body of water, but also manipulating aldosterone, which downregulates your ability to retain sodium, and then sodium promotes water retention as well. Then you have the ability to basically lose more water, more scale weight. However, you are able to replenish your glycogen stores quicker than what you can rehydrate your body. It's a more simple process to replenish glycogen than it is to rehydrate the body, which is a consideration with a short-term weight-making window. Particularly in weightlifting when you've got 2 hours. I mean, particularly in terms of, like I say, weightlifting in particular, it would be different for other sports, maybe gymnastics and obviously rowing and all these kind of others, judo. Then there's not a high glycogen requirement for weightlifting. So it's more on personal preference in that sense. But there is elements of restriction of carbohydrate can, well, first and foremost, we know that we can manipulate things up to around 2 kilos. And then as well as that, naturally, by reducing your carbohydrate intake, you are going to naturally lower your fiber intake as well. Fiber we cannot digest it, and it slows our digestion rate, means we're much more likely to hold on to food within our intestines, and that's just literally just stored weight as well. Similar consideration around fats. So this isn't anything to consider too much, because fats will have they're quite satiating, being one of them. So in the context of, if you're in the process of a diet leading into a competition, then that's going to be of benefit, just kind of feeling more full and satisfied with your food. Obviously key for kind of hormonal function as well, but they slow gastric emptying as well. So again, that slows our digestion rate, which is considerations when you're on the day of competition in particular. Being mindful of that, particularly if you're not being really restrictive on your carbohydrate, and you're not kind of really plummeting it, because I know I've kind of mentioned a more ketogenic approach. It doesn't have to be that. If you are particularly someone that is quite consistent in their carbohydrate intake, you can probably, well, you can calculate kind of how much do I need to drop my carbohydrate intake by? Does it need to be 50 grams, 100 grams per day? And we can kind of do the maths. And then the last one is obviously protein. The only thing in terms of protein is it's got a high thermic rate. So there's a principle called the thermic effect of feeding. And the thermic effect of feeding is basically something from when we consume calories, it requires energy and calories to break it down, to metabolize and digest it. Whereas carbohydrates, as an example, you will absorb about 90% of those carbohydrates and you will utilize 10% in the process of breaking it down. Fat is a bit more, so you'll absorb about 97% of those calories and utilize, well, anywhere between 0 and 3%, whereas protein has a super high thermic rate, so you will only absorb about 70% of those calories and utilize about 30% in kind of the process of breaking it down. And so one way of kind of enhancing, quote, your deficit is by increasing your protein intake. Like if you have 2 days where your calories and your energy expenditure are the same, but the only difference is you have a higher protein intake, you'll literally have an enhanced deficit on that day. So yeah, in the short term, they would be my considerations, but it brings about a kind of, I think, a wider conversation around kind of when is the appropriate time to diet and how you can kind of periodize that within your training competition cycle leading into the comp.
Perfect. I've got a question coming through, Liv, just asking about that carb restriction. Over what kind of time period would you expect that restriction to be over?
Certainly, I would bring it in. I think it's particularly in the run-up of the last week, because what will happen is there are so many variables that impact scale weight. And can I tell this story?
Yeah, do it.
I'm gonna tell
it.
So
we love a story.
This is a different story. So there's one weightlifter that I work with, and one of the basically I got given her about 3 weeks out, and if there wasn't a major competition on the line, I would have said it was unethical to work with her. And this is like national, this is British level. And basically, long story short, she was a lightweight female, and she basically got an email about, did the maths, set her on her way, got an email about 2 weeks in, and they were like, why is the scale weight not moving? And it was a case of, I was like, she's lying. I've done the maths. Whether she's consciously lying and this kind of major pressure from the governing body, the major pressure of a major competition and it's just getting a bit too much to her, and she's kind of not dealing with it very well, or whether she's unconsciously lying and she is she's just unaware of maybe oils or not tracking accurately and all these kind of stuff. Anyway, I went up to Loughborough, did a body composition test with her, and she got down to a sports bra and a shorts, and I could just see that there was visual change, and I was just like, well, why is the scales not working? Anyway, we just carried on, because I just feel like, just trust yourself. You've done the kind of the maths and all that kind of stuff. Long story short, she comes in the Monday before she was due to fly out, and like her weight had just plummeted. Her weight had absolutely just plummeted. And what had happened was on the Saturday before the Monday, she'd had about 1,300 calories. So bear in mind, there were some days where she was doing double days on like 500 calories a day. Now, I do not advocate that at all. And what I will just say, it's so interesting to hear like discussions around kind of disordered eating and relationship with food, because that's my like remit, and like I'm all for that, and being kind of managing diet culture in weight making sports is huge. This was a special context, and we did undulate her calories and kind of just add that in. It's important to add the context. But on the Saturday, she had 1,300 calories, and she basically went out with friends and just disregarded the macronutrients that I set to her, but stuck to the calories, which I don't have a problem with. One of the things we talk about is you have unconditional permission to eat whatever you want. And she went out with friends and had 2 glasses of wine. And long story short, basically ended up having a one-night stand. And what happened was her scale weight just went bang. It crashed. And this is the thing, in the sense of like, she basically relaxed for the first time in a period in her training block, and all like cortisol doesn't, or the stress hormone, cortisol doesn't cause fat gain, it can mask it though through water retention. And so it would, and so we just say the key to losing fat is having a glass of wine and getting laid, but yeah, and a lot of protein. But in terms of, so the point is, and kind of bringing that back round, it's basically making that week as smooth as possible. And so if you are looking at the week before the competition, I would just try and promote consistency throughout that week. Because as well as that, you can, rather than kind of having a nightmare few days beforehand, you can just kind of level the playing field across the board of the week and promote some really positive routines and behaviors that aren't too drastic, that aren't like plummeting levels through the floor. So yeah, I basically look to try and make that last week as smooth as possible. The reality is, what time restriction would that be? It depends. There are a number of variables. Like I say, yes, we've got carbohydrate, but you can be more specific and look at certain micronutrient fiber intake, like lowering fiber intake. One of the most drastic kind of weight loss like programs, we went through a kind of a period where we went really aggressive on the calorie deficit. Then we would swap the fiber intake out. So we were swapping things like vegetables for Haribo and stuff like this, just to lower the fiber intake, and then kind of drew the carbohydrate level down. And that's quite, like I say, that was a one-off, again, kind of quite, I mean, the goal was something, I'm not going to say how much weight we lost, but it was a lot in 18 days. So yeah, it does depend, but I'll just go for a week.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Yeah, Jess, go.
Right. Okay. So I'd say there's like 2 things that you have to take into consideration, especially when you're working with females. Obviously, from personal experience, and I'm obviously a lot smaller than some of the other weightlifters, time of the month can put on 2 kilos straight away. And it is actually unreal how much it changes your body weight, and also just generally like how you feel. Generally, and I won't go into like detail, but if I'm cutting weight, my period will delay until the day of the comp when I've weighed in, and as soon as I've weighed in and eaten, it comes, and I'm just like, and it could be 3 weeks late, it could be 4 weeks late. And well, it doesn't happen anymore because I don't cut weight, but when I used to cut weight, and it was the most goddamn frustrating thing ever.
Probably exactly the same as Calum kind of went through there. It's a stress and anxiety sort of thing that we almost can't help it happening. I mean, obviously, I'm menstruate at the best of times, but you almost can't, certainly when you're weight cut, there's so much depending on it, whether you know you're bang on target or not, it's going to have that effect. Go on, you've got another one as well.
Well, what I was going to say was, it wasn't necessarily the stress my head was in, because I'd done it before, and I like knew as long as the more chill I am, it's what it was the lack of food, just like obviously like stopping my body from doing its normal thing. And a lot of guys, I'm not saying all guys, but a lot of guys don't take that into consideration. They're just like, oh, just lose the weight, and it's like, doesn't happen.
No, I think like, and that's a really big point to add, and this is particularly within from a female point of view. There's a couple of things. Well, if we're missing, if you're missing your period, that is like our whole. It's basically your body saying you're not fit to have a baby. For whatever reason, and so it's a stress response, and that is completely right in the sense of restriction of calories, never mind the stresses of competition that might come with it. And so it kind of makes complete sense. What you can't, like I say, with females in particular, if you are not collecting data on your own cycle, then you're probably missing a trick. And so really monitor that, and you can use it like use the cycle to its benefit, looking at things like I say in the luteal phase kind of. I mean, they've done things, I mean, they've done everything from mirroring macronutrient, because you utilize in the luteal phase of your cycle, you will utilize fat slightly better as a macronutrient. And then also in the follicular phase, serving yourself with more carbohydrate and all this kind of stuff. It's so, like I say, and that's the kind of the other thing, that if you are messing with your cycle as a female, like that you do not compromise that at all. And so it's one of those things that like you can't. I think there was certainly a culture at times, maybe particularly in bodybuilding, maybe not in so much sport, where people were just kind of going through that. But now it seems to be there's a wider conversation around it, which is really, really positive.
Awesome.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say was quickly, generally, like, and this is for like everyone, I've found that obviously I'm not like fully like sciencey like the other dude, but in general, like, sorry, I'm not like, I've done a nutrition course, but I'm nowhere close to like, it's just personal experience. But I've found out that like when you cut your food down, so say if this girl was like eating 500 calories, and I've been in a similar situation, generally like if you start lowering your calories too quickly, your body like goes into panic mode and then starts holding on to the food you eat. So you almost get to a point where you'll be eating less food, but you're not losing weight, or you're actually putting weight on because your body isn't utilizing any of the energy. It goes into like starvation mode, and it's just something to like keep an eye out of.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say with that is so what will necessarily happen, it depends how long you've been basically dieting for, and like particularly in terms of notion of like a calorie deficit quote will never fail you. It will fail, like I say, if you're in a deficit of energy, you will lose body fat. However, there is considerations in and around kind of the impact of that in terms of stress. As I said, that can potentially mask fat loss, and then as well as that, there is so what happens when we diet as well, there will be a down regulation in a wide variety of your hormonal profile as a whole. Now, this doesn't necessarily, like, this isn't an impact necessarily on metabolism as such, but what it will do is it will impact our energy expenditure as well, because this process of this kind of down regulation process of hormonal function is designed to keep us alive. If we had an ability just to lose weight in a linear fashion, we would die. And so it's basically a down regulation in factors such as testosterone, growth hormone. We see an increase in things like ghrelin, leptin, and all, which basically govern our kind of ability to feel hungry and full and all this kind of stuff. And so it will impact our mood. And as well as that, you can, even to the point where I always just say you can tell when I'm dieting because I don't talk with my hands. Like, I'm a massive fidgeter, and it will literally, if I diet for a prolonged period of time, all of these kind of things will just start to become null and void. I will decrease my intensity in my training, and I won't even realize it. But I will do less steps, and I won't even realize it unless I'm being specifically tracking in that sense. So yeah, it's just kind of the notion of starvation mode isn't necessarily a thing, but there's a wider picture that you can look at to be like, the impact of low food is not a good place to be. It doesn't serve your central nervous system function. It doesn't serve your brain function, as well as obviously performance. And then it doesn't serve your hormonal profile. And then that, as a wider picture, is going to stop you or stall your fat loss and then it can mask weight loss as well, because weight loss and fat loss, two different things.
Cool. Spence, did you have something to add or ask? I think he may have disappeared because I saw him on Brooklyn Bridge a minute ago. There he is.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself.
That's right.
This is like, thank you, by the way, everyone, for this is a super interesting conversation. At the same time, horrifying for me. I mean it. It really is. Like, I feel like, obviously, it's really important. It's super interesting for some people, but like any kind of, well, not any kind, but my absolute belief is that everybody should be looking to optimize health and well-being and link that in with performance. Now, Calum, I know you did throw that in there a few times, and I believe that's the way you sort of approach things. But with all the talk of, missing periods, drastic cuts, water, like fainting, going on a platform, it's horrifying.
Yeah,
that people walk those lines. Yeah, but would you all agree that for everybody on this call, just about, it's unnecessary? Should be looking to optimize their health and for most. Yeah. Should be looking to optimize health, performance, find where you are with great health, and optimize performance, and then work your. You did mention it about understanding doing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 competitions, optimizing that weight, nutrition, health. So all your chemicals are balanced, you're in good health, and your optimum performance for your sport, and then you are where you are, and then look to tweak up and down. So a cut is never drastic and is never painful,
and it shouldn't even be a drastic cut either. That
no, it's never risky.
A couple of kilos.
Or guess what? You sit in the middle of a weight category.
Or you go
Some
up
of the best lifters in the world have done that. Yeah. Go up.
We'll come to all that.
It's doable. It just feels like that isn't covered yet, and I know we're not finished.
No, it's coming. No, it's coming.
Terrifying, yeah.
Don't you worry.
Cool.
Don't you worry. Don't get scared. Calum, there's a couple of bits that I had to maybe kind of question and add on the kind of the water cut and all that sort of stuff. So, am I right in saying that within an hour's period, your body will only be able to take in or replenish a certain amount of carbohydrate?
Yes, there is. Yeah, you are right. But then at the same time, so there's two kind of factors within it. It is a bit, it's more strict. Like I say, electrolyte balance is probably it's not probably, it's going to impact your performance the most. And if we're messing with that, that's my kind of point around the water manipulation. And as well as that, it does serve some people really, really well. But it kind of is one or the other. There's no kind of middle ground there. You either works really, really well, or you kind of get caught up in this no man's land with water manipulation. And like I say, electrolyte balance is integral, particularly in terms of like I say, sports like weightlifting, which aren't glycogen dependent as such. They are, like, it helps. Don't get me wrong, like having a high carbohydrate presence. But then as well as that, if you can look at, maybe you can keep calories in the week before a competition, you can still keep calories fairly high, but manipulate your macronutrient ratio, and so your energy intake, it still stays high. You're still consuming, like I say, maybe a slightly higher fat approach, more protein. And then and then you can change your scale weight without actually having to make drastic cuts, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The other one was creatine. Obviously, we know that creatine has a massive impact on performance, certainly for powerlifting and weightlifting.
Yeah.
If you are supplementing creatine,
Does it actually help?
Yeah,
from an ATP perspective, for the energy system that we use, if you haven't got enough free creatine readily available, then you're missing a trick. Correct me if I'm wrong, Calum, but certainly for that, and caffeine is probably the only other one that is non-tested, but caffeine is probably the nearest to a steroid us non-drug users are probably going to get to.
Yeah,
I've never used creatine.
Yeah, creatine is like the most, it's cheap, it's the most researched kind of supplement on the market, and it's one of those that you can take, like this kind of notion of loading and coming off it and all the rest of it. It's just a bit of a myth. Is you can take, well, the recommended dosage is 5 grams per day, or you can be more specific with the dosage and take your body weight and times that by 0.05, and that's a more specific dosage relative to your body weight. There is some considerations. I mean, you can, again, monitor scale weight if in the run up to competition, and we have had cases where you can stay on it. However, if you are starting to worry, then come off it, and then that will naturally bring some water down as well.
So
is there any theory behind? I might have had a bum steer, because obviously, as any kind of power athlete, you need to be taking creatine. But is there any theory behind ramping up your creatine intake? Forget weight, sorry, purely for performance, not weight. Or is it just keep it on a level playing field?
Yeah, no. So it's basically it's just there to keep your stores topped up. So if your stores are topped up, there's no benefit. There's no benefit. Now it depends. So I'm just of the kind of the thought process, like just save money and then just go 5 grams a day from the start.
That's what I do. Yeah.
That'll take you about a month to get to kind of full stores, or you can have this idea of loading phases where you can go anywhere. I mean, depending on body weight, anywhere between 10 and about 18 grams, I think. And that'll get you basically to full stores within a week.
So am I right in thinking that creatine does also, it helps store water, it increases the amount of water that is stored, is that right?
Yeah, and that'll also be specific, and that'll be different from individual to individual. So there's not one set rule of thumb with that. Massively dependent on things like genetics, and it's something to look out for. And
also, it's very common for people to get put off creatine. Is there any truth in the theory here? Debunk a myth if need be. But I've heard quite a few people, I've never had this problem, who feel like they start taking creatine, they retain water, and they panic a bit, especially if they're weight sort of dictated athlete, and maybe, or figure or whatever, and come off, where it's just a matter of getting over a hump and it'll settle. Or are they likely to always store weight? Because I've had examples of people taking it, going, "Oh, put on a bit of weight, so I stopped." When they should have persevered.
Yeah, I would definitely promote the idea of, because there is benefits to it. I definitely promote the idea of having some form of patience with it. There don't get me wrong, that it's kind of one of those things where there are some people where that they will experience that, but it's such a small percentage of them that it kind of probably draws a few more to kind of think that way. But yeah, I would get them to persevere with it. And if it really doesn't sit well with them, then give it but they've given it a good shot, but get them beyond that first month in particular.
Sean, did you have something to add? Or you just hit the unmute button? Unmute, mate.
I've got a point here from Claire, quickly, please. So for those that aren't actually using a nutrition coach and want to obviously manage their weight by themselves, what is the best way to work out the calorie intake and what their macros should be? Have you got a calculator that you would recommend?
Yeah. So there's two ways you can do it. So Google the Harris-Benedict formula. That's probably one of the ways I use. Or like you can do it straightforward enough. You can make a note of this. So take your body weight in kilos, times it by 24 if you're a male, 22 if you're a female. That'll give you an idea of where your BMR is, your basal metabolic rate is. And then from there, you multiply it by your activity factor, which is anywhere, it's anywhere between 1.1. The only time I've used 1.1 is someone with no lower limb function.
Sedentary, isn't it, predominantly?
Yeah. So it's going to generally be between 1.2 and 2. The reality is, if we're going to talk in the realms of our population here, anywhere between 1.2 and about 1.65 ish. And just remember that maintenance is a range. Like today is Sunday, done very little. Like we're in lockdown, probably again done even less as a result. And so kind of looking at maybe a lower end, like a Netflix kind of day, and then a kind of a really active kind of day, and just work a range between the two.
I'll simplify that a little bit on the basal metabolic rate, which is that Harris and Benedict. It is Benedict, isn't it?
Yeah.
Harris and Benedict equation is the basic amount of calories that your body needs just to live and survive and get through the day without doing anything else. You then have that multiplier, as Calum said, that 1.2 through to 1.65, dependent upon the amount of activity that your body does. So that is obviously going to be different per day. If you Google basal metabolic rate, the Harris-Benedict comes up and it will give you that activity multiplier as well. But it's key to make sure you have that. Otherwise, you are literally going to be eating what you need just to survive and not to perform.
Can I just add one thing to that? Is having seen so many people doing this, so many people get their activity level wrong.
Yeah.
I'd err on the side of being conservative to start with, because like you think you're all over activity. If you sit in an office all day or drive a truck or something and then go and powerlift for an hour, you're almost sedentary. Like a day, like literally. No. I put myself down as inactive, and I go
your point's valid.
Half a day. Yeah, so just don't over-egg it.
Yeah, you got. I think the biggest one is 5 times a week intense activity, which is probably going to be nearly kind of running a marathon rather than going to the gym or walking your dog kind of thing. So it's worth noting. But also obviously engaging to people with like Calum as well. Gary.
Yeah, so when you're talking about your level of activity, is it, I think you might have just mentioned it, intensity or volume?
I would be, obviously your exercise does matter, but then with particularly like general population, I'd just be like, well, what's your step count? What, like that, I think it's Paul. Yeah, Paul said, he mentioned NEATs, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Like that has a much greater role in your energy, your total daily energy expenditure than any form of exercise. And so if you're hitting, like I say, if you're someone that's very active and you're hitting like 15,000 plus steps a day, that's going to that'll be more energy. And this is considerations for kind of the last couple of weeks of a competition cycle as well. It's just manage it. It's a low impact means of expending energy. It doesn't tax your central nervous system, and it has, like I say, when you're in the gym, you're going to expend, particularly a weightlifting or powerlifting session, 200 calories, maybe more, 200 to 500, whereas 10,000 steps for an 80 kilo individual, it's going to be in the region of about 500 calories. So if you're doing that every day, you'll do that in a fairly straightforward manner. It's not too time consuming. You can kind of block it out through the day and make an effort with it. It's more beneficial.
My original one that I kind of brought up in my second Worlds out in Sicily, it's probably a token gesture to that, in that I think I went over at about 57.5, 58, looking at the 56 cap. Went over with a friend of mine, so the 2 days beforehand, we literally just went, we were in jet, And we literally just wandered, I think 4 miles out, 4 miles back both days, thinking nothing of it, just coasting and getting steps in as it goes, and ended up 1.5 kilos under. And as it goes, my calves are in an absolute shit state as well. But that probably didn't help performance. But I will now move on, and we'll quickly click on to the third one. I'll move my screen so I can actually see it. And I don't intend to spend too much time talking about this, because option 3 is drastic dieting strategies. It's normally in addition to the previous 2 as well. As Calum's already said, that short-term macronutrient restriction doesn't have to be used on its own, and neither does the water manipulation. You can kind of use both with each other if needed, and it's probably sensible to do a little bit of both, and they'll both give you kind of a nice run in, a nice healthy performance driven way into the competition. But that third one, drastic dieting strategies, normally in addition to the previous, starvation, increased activity. And I don't mean going for an extra 5K walk. I mean going for a walk all day, going for a run with bin bags on, all the bad things that you see with MMA and boxing that normally are associated to 24-hour weigh-ins, where you go into a bath for an hour, get out, dry off, go back into a bath for an hour, and that's you for 2 days before the weigh-in kind of thing. For me, it's not a long-term solution. It's not performance. It is just getting into that weight category and literally just hanging on and surviving. So I'm not going to spend much time there unless anybody really wants to question that, but I don't think you will. Cool. So that kind of brings us on to most of the meaty bits are kind of done. So I'm just going to go through taper tips, kind of stuff that I've kind of come across that I think help. I think we've probably touched base on most of these. So I've got a couple of pages to go through before we literally go into a free-for-all on questions. Everybody can jump on Cam's brain and pull out as much as you can. This is one that I learned probably a couple of years into my powerlifting side of things. If you're not sure whether you can have the food before weigh-in, so you wake up in the morning, ready for weigh-in. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. You're weighing in at 8:30, 9 o'clock, whenever. You're standing in your pants, and you're really hungry, and you have your scales that you already know that those scales are going to weigh very similar to your scales, and you've got a croissant in front of you, and you go, "Oh, I'm not sure if I can have this." Stand on the scales in your pants, hold the croissant. Whatever it weighs is probably going to be the amount that you'll weigh in once you have that food and then go in and weigh in. There's probably some differentials in there with what you eat and all that sort of stuff, but you're probably going to find that by the time you drive to the venue, get to the venue and weigh in, you'll still weigh underneath the weight cap. So if you wake up in the morning and you test and you're 0.5 kilo under, you can probably have something to eat, and it's probably going to help your performance. I've just seen about 4 faces smirk, so it's probably someone mugging me off in the comments. Lads, is someone mugging me off in the comments?
No, it's just Liv expressing her love for an almond croissant.
Very good, Liv. You'll be baking some of them for us when we get out of the lockdown. So that's quite a simple, easy one. Unless Calum's got any comeback on it.
Yeah, I mean, the other way you could look at it is kind of look at particularly the notion of carbohydrate value as well. If you're eating 20 grams of carbs, then the reality is you're probably going to store those. So there's 20 grams plus you times that by 3, which is 60. So there's 80 grams that you are going to be putting on essentially. And so, yeah, there's just another consideration depending on how much leeway you have. As well as that kilo, 1 litre of water is going to be a kilo of body weight and things like that. So you can calculate these things.
Cool. Thank you. Don't cut too early. It will affect your performance. And if you are cutting 3 to 6 weeks out from competition, guess what? You're in the wrong weight category and you probably need to do something about it. And it probably involves some kind of GVT and getting massive legs. But if you're really contemplating cutting 4 to 6 weeks out from competition, and trust me, I have done it myself about 4 years into being a 50.
Yes, you did, Craig. Yes, you did.
No, that one wasn't so bad, Christian. Once you can pipe down. Fluid over nutrients. I think we've kind of not nutrients is probably the wrong thing actually. Yeah. I would suggest going fluid over a dietary cut more than anything else. Your body needs food. Your body needs nutrients to use. So fluid is probably going to be the priority if you're a couple of kilos over. What else did we have? Yeah, cool. So when you're running to an event, in fact, I'll bring them all up because I think there's another one down there. Yeah, if you're leading to an event and you're weighing in at 10 o'clock and you know you're lifting at 12 o'clock, if you have the opportunity to do so, weigh yourself in at that time a couple of weeks beforehand and lift around that time. Get used to lifting around the time you know you're going to lift at. I know for me, I really like lifting in the evening, sort of 4 o'clock till 8 o'clock in the evening. I love lifting, but because I'm a tiny human, I generally lift with the girls, but I normally lift first thing in the morning because I'm a lighter human and I'm not normally used to it. So for the 4 weeks leading up to it, I will start to prepare my body to get used to that side of things. Next one was, kind of, if you've got anything else to jump in, I'll just jump in and chuck it on there. Take the time to look at your own body and also know when you need help. This goes back to my very camp psychology, I want to help everybody kind of thing. And it's simple things. I used to, and I don't do it quite so much, but I used to weigh myself in my pants morning and evening for 4 weeks leading up to competition. So I know what my limits are. Yeah, and it's just so you know where you've come from, where you've got to, have a rough idea what you've eaten. I'm really obsessive, so I will probably eat the same sort of things for 4 weeks. It's the military's fault. I get used to it. But it means that I know exactly what's going on. I have full control over what's going on, and I understand how my body fluctuates and gets used to things. So learn about your body. However, there will be a point where you will probably take that step too far. And if you're doing it on your own and you're not questioning what you're doing, having people to reflect around you, and the common one is probably your family. Your family will always worry about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it. And if you've got a mother like mine and my mum's brilliant, she was my best friend and she has been for years. But she's not a lifter. She isn't interested in exercising that way. So she doesn't get what I do and why I do it. But to an extent, it's that sort of individual which kind of goes, "You okay? Are you aware of what you're doing and the impact that it has on you as a person and the habits you're creating?" So sometimes it's just worth taking a step out of the box and maybe reflecting, and we'll come to that a little bit more in a bit.
I would just add on to that. Can I just add on to that?
Yeah, no, go.
Scale weight is such a valuable metric, but like it's so often that it impacts people's, even just outside of competition, it impacts their day. They step on the scales and it impacts the way that they go about their day. If that is the case, then that is a sign that you should just reach out. If you don't know how to interpret scale weight data, then ask, because once you know how to just rationalize it and all the variables that kind of impact it and the way that it can potentially impact it, then it can allow you to make a lot more accurate kind of reflections on kind of why why your scales might fluctuate in the way that they do, and then how you can then use that data to kind of guide the next bits of your kind of nutrition.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's maybe a bit of I want to say a generational thing, maybe, but I think our industry, certainly through the 80s and 90s, had issues with that side of things, in that, I mean, it's predominantly personal trainers, because we've only just got to the point where we've got a lot of a branch out of lots of coaches, but a lot of coaches will not want to educate people because they want people to rely on them all the time. Whereas I'm kind of the opinion that if I educate my athletes, they don't have to kind of lean on me all the time, and they understand what they're doing, and they love the fact that they're being educated, and they'll stay with you more because you're educating them. I've with the Crazy Strength lot, a number of them are now becoming coaches and doing really well themselves and coaching other people now, which is something I love to see. Another cheeky tip that I generally use, and I had a set of scales that came with me around the world for about 6 years. If you've got a set of scales at home that you have used and continually use, take it with you to the competition. Once you've weighed in and you know what the weight is, get in the toilets, get in the same kit and weigh yourself again on your scales, and almost self-calibrate your scales to calibrated scales. It gives you a good idea of, well, hold on a minute, I've just weighed in half a kilo under. Well, that's because your scales aren't calibrated and they weigh you half a kilo light all the time. So you will have done way too much work, half a kilo's worth of work, when actually you don't need to do that. Either that or you need to get a new set of scales.
Craig,
Yeah.
That's quite important. That's quite important for people like me who travel around quite a lot. So I might be traveling around for 6 months of the year. I'll leave the UK in the October, and I'm like, I know I'm bang on weight.
Yep.
I've just flown for 6 hours, eaten in a hotel, eaten in an airport, eaten in another hotel, then go to the track. I weigh in, and I'm like, why am I heavier again? And you can't work it out. Everything changes because you're constantly traveling, and you're not always sure where your next meal's going to come. So
Yeah.
meal prep for me has been massive, but sometimes you just have nothing, and like European food, sometimes mostly shit. Just eating crap all the time, loads of bread, ham and cheese, all you get.
Do you always
That's
weigh
not
on the
good
same
for your health.
scales?
So I've got my own scales that I always use, but then when you get to a track, the track scales are the ones that are at the track. That's what they'll use, which
Okay.
means that you might know what you weigh, but that track scales might be totally different.
So you're lucky in that, obviously, being military, you have access to med centres. Well, you don't right now. No one has access to med centres. But when COVID-19 dies, eventually, you will have access to that med centre. So where we got, oh yeah, Tanita scales. Yeah, we use quite a few of those. Get into the med centre. They are calibrated. So go and chat the nurses up. Go and weigh yourself on calibrated scales. Take scales with you and just make sure you know where they're at. Take them with you all the time.
Also, you've got as an athlete that's in a
Just
weighed
a
event.
gobshite.
As an athlete that's in a weighed event, you've got to like. I go all over Europe competing as well, mate, and you literally can't rely on hotel food and stuff like that. So you got to either plan in your first trip from the airport is a Lidl's that you're familiar with, so you can buy your own food, or you can take food across Europe and stuff now fairly easily as well. So
Not
I
right now,
don't
you
know,
can't.
man.
Not right now.
Yeah, but if you're a weighed athlete, you've got to consider that, haven't you? Because otherwise
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know Dave, that I don't know whether he's here. I'm sure he'll give us a shout in a minute and give me some abuse if he is. But Dave is rigid. For anyone that doesn't know Dave Watts, he was the lad that won the overall at the drug-free Worlds last year. 67.5 cat lifter, squatted 200 kilos, benched 170.5 paws, deadlifted 261 for a world record, which was decent. He's lifted 270 since as well. But he's pretty rigid. He will pretty much eat the same things most days. Very varied diet, but he will eat the most things. So when we go to a competition, as Spencer said there, the first things we're going to look to do is we're going to find an Aldi or a Lidl's, and we're going to buy what he would normally eat and eat as near to as what he would normally eat. So he knows exactly how he's going to fluctuate. Jess. Oh, you've accidentally unmuted yourself. Or do you just want to share with us what you're eating? Oh, I've muted you. You're good. Cool. So I think that moves us on.
Yeah.
No, at least you didn't fire a shot.
Well, hello.
Oh, I think you unmuted yourself. You're good. Just play it up. We'll move on, mate, unless you got something to add.
I've got something quick. One of the things to do with traveling that I've noticed previously with body weight fluctuations was actual amount of sleep and recovery that people are getting. I don't know if that's something you've noticed yourself, where having a reduced amount of sleep or recovery can actually hold body weight.
Yeah, disrupted sleep definitely will, because obviously you burn a certain amount of calories when you sleep. If you normally sleep for 7 or 8 hours and it is good quality rested sleep in the right zones of sleep, then you're going to burn a certain amount of calories, which is common and normal for you. But if, most of the squaddies that are with us today, you might get 2 or 3 hours sleep, you're definitely not going to burn that amount of calories. It's just impossible. And the quality of the sleep is going to be that much worse as well. So it's definitely going to affect it. And actually, Calum, you might be able to add to that, but traveling on an airplane and things like that will change the way you hold water as well. I know Sunita, I think she fluctuated up by about 2 kilos in just fluid retention alone whilst on a flight. And that was one of the things that dropped off quite quickly once we got her back from New York.
Yeah.
Cool. So, go on. Yeah, cool. Perfect. My key takeaways: make sure that the risk is worth the reward. If it's not, don't do it. It's not worth it. You are here to enjoy what you're doing. And I think that comes in a minute as well. Always keep in mind the long-term goal. And this is more aimed at, and it's probably a lesson that I have learned the hard way. Don't restrict yourself to a weight category. If you're within the first couple of years of a sport, it's going to come back to the quotes that I put up to begin with, but if you're weightlifting or powerlifting and you've not done the hard graft, especially if you haven't had a background in another sport beforehand, probably for at least 3 years, you're not really ready to decide what weight category you're in. You're not going to be optimal in whatever weight category you're in, because you're not optimal in movement, you're not optimal in performance, so you're not going to be competitive in the category you really should be in. So always keep in mind that long-term goal. Never forget why you started. For most of us, this is a hobby. I've dealt with, in my time, so many athletes that they'll do 2 or 3 years with me, and then they'll go, I just can't, just not enjoying it. I just not. Why aren't you enjoying it? It's just so much pressure. I just want a PB. I just want to do this. Well, why don't you just take a step back and remember that you've got family and a job and everything else that you need to be doing. Just remember why you started. You did this because you enjoy it and you love the sport. If you don't love the sport, take a step back. Play with a different sport. If you don't love it and it doesn't make you feel the way that it did in the beginning, you either need to reignite that love, or you need to find another way into making yourself happy. Remember your why you're doing it in the first place. Health and performance go hand in hand. Long-term performance, health and performance go hand in hand. And there's a big one down the bottom there for me, so I can't see. I'm going to move those. If you wouldn't recommend it to someone else, why are you doing it? I have so many coaches that I have brought through, certainly with British weightlifting and a few of the Elico courses that I've delivered, which will go, I got my athlete to 500 calories for 2 weeks. Really low carbohydrate. And then we did a massive water load. And I'm like, have you done that? Well, no, but it's not about me. Well, yeah, but if you wouldn't do it because you know it's not safe, why the fuck are you putting your athletes through it? It's just irresponsible. So sometimes, again, it's that, take that step back, look at exactly what you're asking someone to do, keeping the long-term goal in mind, and would you recommend doing it yourself? This goes back to one of the things that I look to try and do with my team. Educate yourself and everyone around you, and learn how your body works and reacts to things. And this is the one thing, certainly with the Sunday sessions, I'm really keen to try and do. I know we had Christian last week, who I've been learning from for the last 12 months now, and having people like Calum coming in as well, and helping educate me too. I'm really keen to kind of keep that 360 feedback coming as well. And I think that takes us back to that bad boy. Have a look at those. I think, let me know if there is anything there that we haven't answered. They even flash up. Look at that. Oh, how long before a comp before we're dieting? In an ideal world, you're not dieting. You're just eating what you normally do, and you'll just calorie restrict a little bit before you come to competition for your ideal perfect performance. How do you determine what the best weight category is for an athlete? I think we've kind of ticked that one. In an ideal world, to be the most competitive you can within a category, you'll sit a couple of kilos probably above your weight category, and you'll just manage your macronutrients and cut a little bit of fluid, and you'll then go into that and be as heavy as you can within that weight category for maximal performance, maximal contractile mechanisms. If you're struggling to get into that weight category, guess what? That's not your weight category. So you need to work on getting bigger and moving up into the next weight category. Yes, Christian, I know you're laughing. I know I need to do it, but I struggle so much with putting on mass. Next one was,
fake news.
You bastard. Should you pick a weight category federation? I'm getting tired now. Should you pick a federation to lift in based upon the weight categories they run? Yes and no. Now, obviously, I'm only going to discuss drug-free federations, BDFPA and British powerlifting. There's similarities in the weight categories that are in there. How do I answer this honestly? If you're new to powerlifting and you're not naturally gifted, you probably want to start in somewhere like BDFPA, which is I am secretary for coaching for it, but it's probably the smaller organization. It's very friendly. I love the organization itself, and it will enable you to get a lot of confidence before you then grow and build up, probably jump up a couple of weight categories, and then go and lift in probably what is at the moment the more competitive federation in the British powerlifting side of things. just an honest answer from my side of things. So I would use them for what they are, and take the opportunities that they both bring for you. But they're both very good federations. How to taper to wait for a comp without losing too much strength. I think we've probably ticked that bad boy. Cutting water for a weight cut. Seeing questions coming in, Glads. If there's anything there that isn't mugging me off, just shout. When would you consider it no longer sustainable to cut into a weight category? Yeah, I found this the hard way. I didn't PB for 12 months because I was being really stubborn and wouldn't refuse to go up the next weight category. If you're not making any progress and you're almost constantly on a restrictive diet, the weight category is not yours. You need to go up. What factors drop to a lighter weight category? Only if you are carrying too much adipose tissue that you cannot use to move weight. Fairly simples. Is it best to diet down at, oh, here we go. This is one of yours, Glads. Is it best to diet down at the beginning of a block and fuel up and then train at a lighter weight and push the boundaries into the category you actually lift in? No, I would suggest that you lift or you eat optimally throughout any block of training and then you lift in the category you've got. The only exceptions for that is if you have weighed in for a qualifying competition for a national champs, you then need to manage that through the period of training that you're going through. So for me, for example, I did a year at 67 because I am now a master. Let's not talk about it. But I sit naturally at about 63, so came down to 63 for a year. And then I'll probably go back up to 67 for a year next year because I probably shouldn't be restricting myself. I should probably go back up and lift. There, Christian has said it.
Are you literally saying that you weigh the same as me right now, basically?
Jess, we're not allowed
3 or 4 kilos.
We're not talking about this, Jess. And we're not talking about the fact that you're a better lifter than I am as well.
Well, Craig pretends he's amazing at this weight cut managing, but I remember you tried to weigh in just under, and you ended up being about 3 kilos lighter than you needed to be.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I said it at the start. You probably weren't here when I got it. I am just really good at getting into a weight category, and I've got to the stage where I'm probably too good at it, and I'm probably not. My performance isn't as good as it could be.
You need to like hit the weight on the point. That's how you do it professionally. Like 50.
I think you did at your last one, didn't you?
On the dot.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
That is an art. That absolute art.
Never
cool.
again.
And then the last one. The last one is it best to sit above a weight category leading into a comp? Yeah, as long as it is just above the weight category and then drop back into that category so you can be as strong as you can in that category. However, it depends on how that affects you psychologically. I know a lot of athletes like to just sit right at the top so they can eat normally and they can just go into that category nice and easy. Cool. So that brings us back to this bad boy. This is probably one of the biggest ones for me in that in barbell sports, if you don't have patience and take time to get structurally strong with all the stability side of things that comes with it, and have patience and grow into the sport and dedicate your time to the sport, you are in the wrong sport. If you haven't got patience, you are in the wrong sport. It takes time to get strong if you haven't got Anavar and everything else helping you. Cool. Thank you very much. I will now open it out to questions. In fact, what I will do, I'm going to massive thank you to Calum, who has been awesome. I have very much enjoyed your company this evening. What I do have, as Glad's asked me right at the start, is I have a poll, which you should be able to see now, which gives you an idea. You can vote for as many of those as you want. You may click more than one. If it is something else, and I'm sure there's plenty of people that will click something else, slide into my DMs shamelessly and just give me an idea of what that something else is. You are more than welcome to click and vote away as many times as you wish. Perfect. I can see them all coming in now. Beautiful. Cool. And then if people want to unmute their mics and ask questions, pick any brains, you are more than welcome.
I said something else on the poll. Is it possible to look into like power for weightlifters, like bios and power and stuff like that?
We can maybe do that as a one-er and talk about that for powerlifting and kind of the conjugate method side of things as well. How about that?
I meant like jumps and
Yeah, so plyo and all that sort of stuff.
yeah.
Cool. I only add the conjugate side of things with the speed work for powerlifting because a lot of people, certainly with the powerlifting programming side of things, will just go just squat and deadlift and bench, and there's no kind of power work and things like that. And I know there is a lot of that within the weightlifting fraternity as well. So it'd be an interesting conversation. Perfect. I am gonna, in fact, I'll grab my phone and take a picture of that, just in case I lose it in my technophobes. And if there's no more questions, I will end that conversation there. Any more for any more? Perfect. Let's end that recording.